Dr. Williams has been sending everyone out to collect water and fish samples, and he's doing it a lot. So far, he's not saying why. Hal, Gail, and Ed have been carrying out the orders, but Gail noticed something odd.
All these fish swimming together, and all in the same direction, as if something was chasing them.
Look, down there. Octopus never do that.
Something's happening down here.
Yeah, but what?
I don't know what that octopus was doing that they said octopuses never do. Its movements and everything else look perfectly normal to me, but they're closer to it, so maybe it said something I didn't hear.
Well, we've got enough samples. Let's get back to Sealab. Hey, I'm caught!
What's happening? Hal? Ed?
Where'd this come from?
According to what we saw, it came from in front of your faces where you couldn't possibly see it. Is someone illegally snaring fish? No, it's what we in the underwater community call a derelict net. Someone lost their fishing net and it ended up drifting around, causing issues for divers who don't look where they're going. They're a big problem all over the world.
Yeah, and that's the trouble with nylon nets. They don't rot out. They'll drift around for years, catching everything in their path.
Yeah, like us.
We get to watch some exciting footage of Ed quietly cutting them loose with his dive knife. But the rescue isn't finished yet.
Hey, look! There's something struggling in the net. Oh, it's just a baby dolphin.
I'll cut him loose.
Be careful. He's too weak to make the surface.
We shouldn't leave him.
Let's take him back to Sealab.
Good idea. You can stick your regulator in his blowhole to help him breathe. Really? But they make it, and now she's named him Tuffy and is training him to rescue divers in distress. She has an ultrasonic tone generator that he responds to. A bucket of yummy fish for rewards also helps.
Looks like normal plankton, except, Hal, here, take a look.
It's Gonyolux. Isn't that the type that causes red tides?
No, Gonyolax isn't a made-up word. It's a kind of microscopic critter that actually does cause red tides. Somebody did their homework. When water temperatures rise and nutrients are abundant, plankton go crazy, eating and multiplying. Our team will talk about how the Gonyolax gobbles up all the oxygen in the water so the fish and other creatures suffocate, but it's worse than that. It also poops out a toxic chemical that causes paralysis and death in sea creatures, and also in humans if we get enough of it. I've lived in the Puget Sound area for over 10 years now, and I think we've only had one actual red tide. Every year we do get plankton blooms, and when that happens, divers might as well stay home and watch Netflix, because under the water you pretty well can't see a thing.
Check gear. Tanks full? Compass? Depth gauge? Watch?
I'll go.
Ready to dive.
Into the water, team.
Right now, I'm a little impressed. That's exactly how we do it. Check your gear, make sure everybody is set, and go in feet first while holding on to your mask and air supply so the force of the water doesn't knock it off your face.
Hey, Tuffy's coming with us.
Those are called DPVs, or diver propulsion vehicles. Divers spell that S-C-O-O-T-E-R.
Hey, cut that out. Those are my samples.
Come on, Gail. Your dolphin's getting to be a problem.
He likes to play.
So do I, but let's talk about time and place. Tuffy goes off chasing a fish and they can't find him when it's time to go back. They discover him in a cave having problems with a moray eel. Now, I've never heard of a moray brave enough to attack a dolphin. In fact, morays aren't aggressive at all unless you give them a reason to be. The first time I saw a green moray in Honduras, I got a really cool close-up with its mouth open. The other divers said I was crazy to get that close to it, but the eel didn't seem to care. I didn't try to touch it. I didn't hold anything out to it. There was nothing on me that could be mistaken for food. He was way out of his den and looking around, but he was just curious what kinds of weird fish we were. When I didn't do anything that he considered interesting, he ignored me. Divers get in trouble with creatures like morays or the wolf eels that we have here in Washington when they start bringing food to try and entice the eel out of its den. The most popular food to take pretty much all over the world is hot dogs. It doesn't take long for an eel to get used to getting a hot dog when these creatures come along. But if you don't happen to have one, you know what else looks a lot like a hot dog to a hungry eel? Yeah, don't feed the critters. Nothing good will come of it. Tuffy wasn't waving hot dogs, but he was invading its den, and the moray chased him out. At least it didn't press charges. All in all, Tuffy isn't endearing himself to the rest of the crew.
We got a good sample, Ed.
I hope so, Dr. Williams. Hey, watch it! There goes one afternoon's work.
Gail, your Tuffy is getting to be a problem.
Yes, sir.
He says from now on, Tuffy has to stay outside. He's not allowed in the moon pool except for training, and then he goes back out.
Let me have the next slide, Gail.
Oops. Sorry.
Gail, what's the matter? That's the second one you've dropped. Are you still worrying about that dolphin?
I wish I knew if Tuffy was all right.
Look, Gail, we've got a biological mystery on our hands that we've got to solve. So get your mind back on the job.
I'll try, Hal. I'll be all right tomorrow.
They haven't told us how old Gail is supposed to be, and I initially thought she was one of the scientists, even though right now she's acting Bobby's age.
We'll be at the edge of the seamount in a few minutes.
I can feel that cold current already.
Something's wrong. I'm having trouble breathing.
Check your pressure gauge.
I'm almost out of breathing mixture.
Turn on your reserve valve.
Oh, yes.
Okay, that dates the cartoon. Submersible pressure gauges like the one she checked had only been part of diver equipment since 1969. Before that, you tried to time how much air you expected to use and hope you were close to being right. Throughout the 70s and even after the introduction of air gauges, divers used a device called a J-valve to keep from running out. This was a long lever that ran from the tank valve to someplace where you could reach it. When you ran out of air, you pulled the J-valve and it released another section of the tank and gave you enough air to get you to the surface safely. Assuming it hadn't already gotten bumped and opened and you already used your reserve air without knowing it. More than one diver pulled on that lever only to find that it was already down. Divers have a standard response to such an emergency. Oh crap. Eventually we did away with the J-valve and just started watching our gauges more closely. Today, if you take scuba training, you'll learn that the rule is come up with no less than 500 pounds in your tank. There's a nice big red line on the gauge to tell you when you're there. I've never emptied a tank. My wife did once during her first trip to Honduras. Fortunately, when she tried to take a breath and there was nothing there, she was only about this far below the surface because she was already in the process of coming up. There was no crisis, she just felt a little sheepish about absent-mindedly breaking the rules.
Oh, I'm a dum-dum.
Anyway, that was the equivalent of a J-valve that Gail just used. It doesn't bother me. How could they foresee developments in the field? They wrote what they knew. That's how you do it.
Another mistake like that, Gail, and I'll have to restrict you from diving. What's wrong with you anyway? So that's what's been bothering you. How'd he get in?
He must have sneaked back in with us.
What would you say if I gave you another chance at training him?
Oh, I'll work very hard with him, but only on my free time, I promise.
Can I keep him, Daddy? Can I? I'll feed him and pick up after him and take him for walks and brush him and take care of him, the goodest you ever saw. How old is Gail? In the lab, Dr. Williams uses a tank to recreate the conditions outside and introduces the gonulax. Sure enough, it produces a miniature red tide and the fish are hurting. That means the reason all the fish out there are heading the same direction is because they can tell the red tide is coming even though humans can't. They don't want to be around when it shows up.
Any of you guess what this means for Sealab?
If the fish can't get oxygen from seawater, then neither can we.
Right so far. Keep going.
It means that our oxygen from seawater extractors won't work.
Exactly. The life support for Sealab would be threatened.
For how long? What kinds of reserves do you have? Is it possible just to ride it out?
And how long will the red tide last?
Can't tell. A day, maybe weeks.
I'll fill all reserve cylinders, then send an emergency line up to the surface. And when the red tide starts, we'll call an alert and bring everybody in.
It's impossible to know how long such a bloom will last. Red tide is kind of a misnomer because it has nothing to do with tides. Warm water toward the surface gets filled with nutrients from cold water that wells up from below, and the plankton or algae do what they do best, eat and reproduce. Like every other living creature, they have a life cycle, and it varies from one to another. Around here, the plankton blooms usually last a couple of weeks to a month, and we generally only have one big one per year. Other parts of the world vary, a statement that makes me feel like I'm channeling Captain Obvious. I'm not sure they've told Gail how close the bloom is because she and Bobby are going outside to try Tuffy's signal generator in the open water.
What is that? Uh-oh. It's the red tide. It's blooming and coming this way. Let's get back to Sealab.
But to get back, we have to swim through it. We won't be able to see.
Then we swim through it. We've got compasses. Come on. I'll get us back.
She said with great, if somewhat misplaced confidence. There's a problem with her plan.
It's too dark. I can't read my compass.
Me neither. What are we going to do?
Call Tuffy. He'll lead us back.
Yeah, he has an illuminated compass. She starts hitting the signal button.
I'm getting a beeper out there. It's some kind of a signal generator.
It could be Gail's sounder, the one she's been using to train that dolphin.
Can you get a bearing on it?
Yes, sir, 040.
Keep trying to contact them, Sparks. We might be able to talk them in.
Something just brushed by me. I think it's a shark.
It's Tuffy!
If it was a shark, it hightailed it out of there when he showed up. Sharks are afraid of dolphins. Nobody's totally sure why.
I've got a feeling we're going the wrong direction.
It's getting even darker now. Tuffy, stop.
We're in deep trouble. He towed us inside a cave.
Tuffy, turn around. No, Tuffy, come here.
He's hunting his dinner.
Next lesson, you need to work on his vocabulary. They can't think of anything to do but reverse direction and try to get out of here. One of the most dangerous places in scuba diving is what we call an overhead environment. That means there's something big between you and the surface. If you have an air emergency, you're in trouble. Cave divers train for years before they venture into the cool places because one little mistake means you're dead. Bobby leads them out of the cave. Elsewhere, Paul, Ed, and Hal have been following Gail's signal.
The signal stopped.
Or not.
Let me try to signal Tuffy. Maybe he'll come out.
I've got her signal again. It's coming in strong.
Or yes.
Dr. Williams, this red tide is coming in strong, too.
Let's move out.
Before long, they've linked up. The three men are roped together, so I assume the kids will hold on to the ropes. I know Bobby will. Today, I'm not so sure about Gail.
Now, everyone stick together. We're heading back.
No, please. Tuffy's lost in a cave. Help me find him.
Tuffy, does he mean that much to you?
He's mine.
Yours. Gail will look for Tuffy if you want. But remember, no wild creature can really belong to anyone.
It's up to you, Gail. Do we go in?
No, I can't ask that. It's much too dangerous in this red tide. We might get lost in that cave. Let's go home.
Behold the entire purpose of today's episode. Wild animals shouldn't be kept in captivity. Everything built up to this point so they could rub our noses in that. I can let that go by. This was the age of cartoons with lessons. What I can't let go by is how dull it was. Nothing really happened. This is the most exciting scene you'll see all day.
Back off, fella. I'm leaving.
Keep an eye on him. Look out, Ed. Here he comes. He's right behind you.
I know. And he's got my swim fin.
Let him have it.
And that breaks up my best pair of fins.
Riveting. I think I've sussed out that Gail is a teenager, not one of the scientists. I suppose the fact that she hangs out with Bobby should have told me that. That probably means she's grown up here. If so, she should have already known better than to try and domesticate Tuffy. So she's still a contradiction to me. But before we wrap up, there's this.
The fish are all back. At last, the red tide has moved away.
It's good to see that clear water again.
Okay, let's take this step by step. The plankton eat and multiply and fill the water. They live their lifetimes out and die. Everything that dies leaves a carcass behind. Gazillions of plankton are no different. Their carcasses tend to clump together, so after the bloom is over, what you have is this, which we Pacific Northwest divers affectionately call whale snot. I couldn't deprive you of that little fact. It's a great icebreaker at parties. Look perfectly. Read the line. Look perfect. Rub our noses in that. They rubbed so much she had to leave.